We have, next is roll call, whoever's taking that.
That would be me, Mr. Chair.
Okay.
Bevins. Burton. Chesak.
Here.
Lambert.
Here.
O'Day.
Here.
Shipe.
Here.
And Yeager.
Yes.
And next item is the approval of the agenda. I would like a request to make one item added, and that would be under old business. Put on 5B. Ballot referendum arboretum funding, if everybody's okay with that.
Say that again, Jeff.
Ballot referendum arboretum funding, a discussion of that. Anything else anybody'd like to do on the agenda?
Sounds good. Motion to approve as amended.
Motion by Yeager,
Second.
second by Burton. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
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 I'm opposed, motion carries. The next item is our minutes from April 20th. There's a couple of things, I got a note here. I think this would be reflective of something Tony did. She called me and said there's a couple changes that we made. She, working hard as our employees do, she's very diligent about finally approving the minutes for November. So those are two things that aren't on there, if everybody's okay with that. Anything else? Welcome those right now.
Motion to approve with changes noted. Second.
Motion by Yeager, second by O'Day, right? Yep. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye, motion carries. Thank you, Tony. Old business, we have 5A, proposed changes. Which one of you two, Jennifer or Connie, would like to start us out on this?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the commission. As you see, you have a very long memo with a bunch of recommendations in that memo. Connie and I are going to kind of tag team on this. So I'm going to start with Chapter 1. This actually was approved by the Charter Commission on April 20th. However, we're just including this in the memo as it will be in the overall ordinance when we move that forward to the council, and depending on the rest of the items where the Charter Commission would like to move with those. Any questions about that before I move to the next item? So the next, sorry, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Next item is Chapter 2, Officers and Elections, specifically number 14. After reviewing the charter, I realized that the language in Chapter 2, Section 14 says that at the first meeting of the City Council after the regular election, it shall proceed to elect by ballot from its number a president and a vice president. However, that's typically done the first meeting in January. All new elected officials take the oath of office and actually take office the first of the year following the election. So we thought it made more sense to amend the charter to say that this would be done the first meeting in January. Any questions about that?
Thank you for catching that. That's
Thank
been that
you.
way for years and nobody noticed that.
And now Connie's up next.
Is that a cold beer?
Yeah,
Okay,
I brought enough for everybody but you.
go ahead.
You have to drive.
I don't need one, I had plenty before I got here. Go ahead, Jennifer.
Okay, so this is Connie, and the third bullet deals with Chapter 2. It should be Officers and Elections, Duty of the City Council. So kind of going back to the April 20th Charter Commission meeting, Chapter 5 of the City Charter, which talked about streets, was reviewed. And basically, that whole chapter was being removed, except for we didn't know how to deal with the section that dealt with assessments. We didn't know if it should be in Chapter 5, if it should be under the Finance chapter, or where it should be. At that time, staff also shared some concerns about the assessment language that was in Chapter 5, such as the August 15th date that was listed. And staff was looking at the state statute and how it handles veterans. And therefore, the commission said, you know, let's direct staff to review the deferment language and bring it back to the Charter Commission. Long story short, the ordinance that was passed in 1994 was basically put into the charter, and we're not quite sure why that was done. However, there has been several resolutions amending the homestead value and determining whether or not a financial hardship criteria exist. So basically, State Statute 435-193 provides guidance regarding deferment of assessments, in that a city, at its discretion, can defer assessments for a homestead property. They have to pass a resolution or an ordinance determining the criteria. So when staff looked at this, we really thought the best place to put this in would be to add a number 36 under the duties of the city council, because they are the ones that can defer an assessment. And just putting in the blurb, just saying that this is a state statute, we have to pass the criteria, and here we go, without having the whole information listed in there. So the recommended motion would, or the recommendation would be to add a number 36 with just a paragraph in there, and then to renumber the section accordingly.
Anybody have any questions on that? On the county's assessed value, which is in the language we're proposing to change, I noticed it said $110,000, and, you know, just based on what's happened this year with property evaluations going up like they have, will this statute cover that type of change?
Well, the statute, the state statute doesn't cover that. That is determined by the city council to come up with the criteria. And actually, that's another note that I had here, is that on May 6th, when we took a deferment for a veteran to the city council, we were also directed to come back with some language updating that because of exactly what you said, the increase in the estimated market values the last 2 years. So yes, city council will be looking at that dollar amount again very shortly.
Do they then establish that, that number then via resolution, right?
Correct.
Okay. So at this point on this item, have you proposed the language that have you given it to us that you're proposing to change it to then? Is that what?
Yep, so the
okay.
number 35 would read, "The city council may at its discretion defer payment of certain special assessments for street improvements as defined in chapter 429 of the Minnesota statutes where financial hardship exists." That is the wrong 429, that should say 435.193. The council shall, by ordinance or resolution, define the circumstances wherein such deferments may be made. That's the proposed language to be in the city charter.
That way you can change it as you need to.
Correct.
Based on, okay.
And it doesn't list the whole criteria in the charter. It just gives the council their authority to establish criteria as they deem necessary, and then we have it covered in the charter. And then that can eliminate all of Chapter 5 as well.
Anybody have any questions, comments?
Mr. Chair, this is Jan. Pardon me. So by doing it this way, it could be assessed every year or reviewed every year then, correct? So we don't, is that, okay. Thank you.
Correct, and even when it was in the charter, it could be reviewed every year or whenever the council deemed necessary. It just had, in my opinion, it had unnecessary language in our charter that didn't need to muddy up the document, where this paragraph just gives the city the right to do it. And even in our assessment, it says, you know, other circumstances as it may be deemed. I mean, we had a resident that they have deferred the assessment because his house was on a corner lot, and so he got twice the assessment. And he was very close to being on the financial hardship, met all the other requirements, except for the estimated market value. So council used their discretion and deferred that assessment for him.
So you'd look for us to pass this revised language then at this time and send it to the city council?
Correct. It should be chapter 435.193, though, not chapter 420. Oh, you know what? That should say, that is correct, the 429, because 429 is how we issue the debt to assess. So I'm sorry. It was the correct language. I'm getting my state statutes mixed up. I apologize.
It's easy to do.
And so, and Mr. Chair, and so this will be item 36.
Yes.
You said, okay.
Because I do believe 35 deals with the
35 is the powers conferred upon the city council to provide for the abatement or removal of nuisances.
Okay.
Shall not bar or hinder suits, prosecutions, or proceedings in the courts according to the law.
So we thought 36 was deal with assessments, which we do for nuisances, that it followed right there in that area.
Okay.
If anybody would like to move forward with this, I guess we would look for a motion to do that, unless there's an objection. I'm personally okay with the revisal, or revised language.
Lambert, so move.
Motion by Lambert to move forward on the revised language to send to the city council for the deferrals of assessments. Do we have a second?
Second, Jaeger.
Second by Mr. Yeager. Any further discussion?
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Just a question for Administrator Bergman. I know there's a lot of changes in this document. Would separate motions on each one be best, or just one motion on all of this be simpler, or does it not matter?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, Commissioner Schneip, I think motions on each section probably would be the better way to go, just because they're all so different. So, and then, Mr. Chair, we should probably circle back around to the, see if there's a motion to change the language for appointing a president and a vice president at the first meeting in January, as we did not have a motion for
Yeah,
that.
thank you very much. Okay, does that answer your question, Mr. Shipe?
Yes, thank you.
We'll just vote on this one, go back to the other one. Sorry about that. No further discussion. All those in favor of this motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. So we go back to the language, which I think is the fond term of as a no-brainer to change that about the city council. I don't know if you caught that, was that it says that we should vote for a new president following the general election, and that would put us in November to do that. So she caught that and said it should be done the first meeting of the year. And then name the council members as the people you choose from. Is everybody okay with changing that via motion then?
Lambert, so move.
Second. By Lambert, second by O'Day? Yep. I have okay. Any further discussion on that one? Seeing none, please say aye for all those in favor.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Okay, Jennifer, taking this one?
Connie's taking the next one.
Okay.
So the fourth bullet point deals with Chapter 3, the finances, number 2. The first suggested change is that, it lists out number 2, except as otherwise provided here, that they shall be signed by the city administrator and reviewed by the city council. That's still okay, but the city council shall annually levy taxes to provide the following. It's just a formatting issue to move that over and make it be in line. Then when we talk about the permanent improvement fund, most of that language, it references areas of the charter that no longer exist, such as subdivision 11 of this section 46 or 49. Most of 46 was removed in January of 2021. It listed all the funds that the city must have, some of which were not used. However, the permanent improvement fund is still used and was left in. And then section 49 talked about municipal bonds, and it was outdated and therefore was mostly deleted in January of 2021 as well. So this huge section where it talks about, it references, and it talks about 80%, it goes into revolving loan funds for debt and that kind of stuff. So most of that language was outdated. And also, it wasn't in line with the practice, such as they use the permanent improvement fund. The way it has been used in practice is that the permanent improvement fund is used to levy the amount spent for roads. And 100% of the balance was transferred to the construction fund and is used to pay for general maintenance of the roads, such as seal coating, striping, that kind of stuff. And so we weren't in practice with this language that was written in here either. And so the language is just, or this recommendation is just to say that we shall have a permanent improvement fund for paying such portion of cost of improving streets and alleys. For the support of this fund, the city council shall levy annually on taxable property of the city's taxes to an amount not to exceed 9% of the city's previous year's total tax levy. No part of this fund shall be used for any other purpose. So it just reinstates that we shall have this fund, what it shall be used for, and the 9% of the previous year's tax levy was the language that was used to change instead of a mill language.
Any questions by anybody? Is 9% been enough?
That generally pays for the with the street swiping, or street striping, the seal coating, the chip seal, just repairs and maintenance, and some of the salary of staff, of the engineering staff that we allocate there, but it doesn't actually, isn't enough to provide for the construction of a road, if that makes sense, for like a complete mill and overlay, for example. So we generally use this levy to pay for the maintenance and some staff salary. I think leaving it at the 9% kind of goes back to maybe our forefathers that put it in the charter, that they didn't want you to be levying 100% for it. You know, that we do issue debt as a way to fund the roads, is how I look at this language.
So this is a special levy then, in essence, because it's specifically spelled out in the charter. It's 9% for that purpose. Otherwise, the city would levy taxpayers for your needs, but this is separate. Do I understand that correctly? I mean, if you didn't have this in the charter, wouldn't you just then be levying taxpayers for that amount of money anyway?
Yes, but I would say now we might take out debt for
Pardon
the
me?
road. We would take out debt now for the road improvement. We would look at different ways of taking it out. So, I mean, we could leave it in there or take it out. I mean, that's up to the commission and the council.
And Mr. Chair?
Yes, Jen?
I know when we were talking about this chapter, the Charter Commission felt pretty strongly about keeping that language in for the Permanent Improvement Fund, and that was one of those things that, you know, while we changed the language to get rid of the mill term, we kept that in there because it was our understanding that the Charter Commission felt that needed and should be in the charter.
I have a comment, I guess.
Yes.
If we're gonna put this in the charter as a permanent improvement fund and not use it for permanent improvement, then in my opinion, that's just going against your own charter. So if we took it out and you kept that in mind when we come up with the next year's budget, then there's no question that you're spending money whatever way we need to, instead of calling a certain fund something and then just using it for something totally different. I think that's kind of irresponsible. It's either that or change the name to whatever we want to use this for fund.
Well, look at it is used for improving our streets and alleys. That is true. You know, we just transferred into the construction fund to pay for maintaining our streets and alleys. So in my mind, we are still using it for the purpose that it is in the charter. It's just not enough for, I guess it depends on what you consider improving a street and alley. Is it the resurfacing or is it just maintaining them?
Oh, is it called permanent improvement? Well, maintenance is never permanent. So it's a permanent improvement to me. It would be putting up a new building,
Maybe it,
last longer than the water tower.
perhaps it's permanent because it's in the charter?
Well, Mr. Chair, I
Yes,
guess
Jan.
I look at this as an improvement, you know, if we're doing permanent improvement, because if we're doing seal coating, we have made the life of that road longer. And so, and streets, I personally think it should be in here. But a permanent improvement fund, it allows each year for seal coating to be done on certain streets in town, correct? It's not part of that.
Right. And maybe it's just the way we break up the dollars when we transferred into the construction fund. Maybe it really does go to pay for the improvement of a street, and yet, and the city levies dollars, or takes out, well, can't take out bonds for the maintenance of it. Maybe it should be called a street improvement fund instead of a permanent improvement fund. I don't know where the name came from.
It seems to me like it's a redundancy that's not necessary. If you're going to levy 9% for this specific fund, and you need that regardless, why wouldn't you just take this out and then levy what you need anyway? Or is this designating it specifically for that so it can't be used somewhere else? Is that the?
The fund that we put it into is the construction fund called
Right.
Fund 401. And the city generally does not levy dollars for those activities. It takes out debt or it uses this levy. So whether or not the name is correct, the city generally does not levy for street improvements. It takes out bonds to do that activity.
And Mr. Chair?
Yes.
I do believe this fund cannot be used for anything else other than that. So I think it's protected that way. That money is protected.
Any further comments or questions on this by anybody?
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
I had a question for Connie. What would be the impact of taking out more debt if we didn't have this 9% levy, or up to 9%?
There's a statutory debt limit that we can, or that a city can have. We are not at that level, thank goodness. And a lot of our 429, our road improvement debt that we do take out doesn't count towards that maximum. I think if you take it out, it just gives council, they could increase the levy by, say, 10%, and we could say it was because we're doing it for this reason. We'll go back to what Jennifer said, the commission was very protective of this fund in that we do use it. It just, the language that was in there was not adequate anymore, but if, whatever the commission recommends to the council.
Can I get clarification? Because if you levy X amount of percent or dollars, this is included in that, correct? Okay, so you're,
Let's say the city's levy is $6 million. That includes a 9% of the previous year's tax levy for the permanent improvement fund.
right,
It's just not for operations.
right. So I guess in lieu of having this, you would still have the same levy, total dollars, but this designates 9% of what the previous year's levy was included in that 6 million to go to this construction fund, because that's where it's going, or permanent improvement. I mean, I understand why it's in there and what the purpose is. I don't have an objection to just, I guess you're basically rewording a few things and kind of simplifying it here, right? With the wording change?
That is correct, how staff feels.
Okay. Is there any action anybody wants to take on this? If not,
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair. If we could change the name without an issue, and I was just talking to Mike here, Street Alley Maintenance Fund, would that fit this description better? Because that's all it's used for, correct? It's not used for anything else.
Correct, it basically, the money from the county comes in, goes into what we call now the Permanent Improvement Fund, and then we take and transfer that from Fund 240 to 401.
Yep.
Mr. Chair,
yes, Mr. Rudy.
you also mentioned, though, that some of this is going towards salaries.
Because we budget, so the employees, like the engineers that are designing the street, it would go to cover some of their wages, yes. You know, for constructing a street.
Well, now we're off maintenance,
Yeah, we are.
designing streets. So
So-
now that would be inaccurate. So, I don't know. I think you just call it something more general.
Street
like a-
Improvement
like a-
Fund.
Like a streets fund.
Street
Streets
Improvements
Department
Fund.
Fund.
I would rather call it Street Improvement Fund so that it doesn't get lost into the street funds that are used for the cost of plowing the roads and the salt and the general street department maintenance. You know, like if that makes sense. So then it's improvements, it's for the improvements or lasting the life of the road.
I think sorry, Mr. Chair.
Yeah.
I think everything ends up coming out of tax dollars.
Yes, it does.
Anyway. It's tough to decide whether or not you want to keep this in there or not, because I think not keeping it in there actually allows for us to maybe keep a tighter budget.
Correct.
So,
Well, okay, so Joe Citizen asks the staff or council, how can I be sure that 9% of that levy I was contributing to is used for resurfacing or upkeep of the roads? How do you, it's not earmarked, is it, in there to only be used for certain things once it transfers to the construction fund? I mean, it's just, I'm not making an accusation here, I'm just, you know.
The construction fund, Fund 401,
Yeah.
is only used to account for roads. So when we do a street improvement, 14, whatever, we do Greenwood Street, that is all accounted for in Fund 401. Fund 400 is another capital improvement project. That's where we would do if we're doing things for City Hall or a vehicle or that kind of stuff. So I could show Joe Citizen that this was the amount of the 9% levy that the city collected, and it went into Fund 401, and it was used for these street improvements. This is the cost. It might be personnel, it might be payments to a subcontractor, or whatever it is. We could detail that those funds went to pay for these expenses in this fund. Can I show that $400,000 went to construct Greenwood Street? No, because it's in that fund, if that helps clarify.
It does, thank you.
And I just want to reiterate that the city does not, when we're looking at our budget and determining our levy, we don't consider the levy amount for that Fund 401. The only amount that we levy for is this 9% that goes in there. And then the rest of the amount that we need to pay for the streets is going to come through when we pay our debt levy.
Quick question.
Yep.
So if you don't have this in there, you still could legally tax whatever we need for projects into 401 without having this in the charter.
You could, but I think we could also take that money and use it for operations and not levy anything for our street improvements. Does that make sense? We could just
Yeah,
say,
but that would be
we-
a very dumb move.
right, but I say we have it, because it was in our charter, we've got in the habit of levying something for our streets and alley, and I think that's why the commission felt it was very important to keep that levy in here, so that, to make sure that the city council is levying something for road and alley improvements.
Yeah, that's the part that makes sense to me. If you're gonna keep your streets up, kept in good shape, you gotta have something designated, which this does. Okay. Yes. You were gonna say something. But I want you to. Okay.
And as far as the name change, excuse me, Chair, sorry, Mr.
Yeah,
Chair.
it's okay.
But when it says a permanent improvement fund, it says for paying such portions of the cost of improving streets and alleys. So that also says, regardless of what the name is, it tells us what it's used for, is for improving our streets and alleys. So I think we're getting hung up on the name when we could just leave it permanent improvement fund, because in the definition, it says what it's used for.
So, the commission like to take any action on this? If not, I guess we'll move on to our next item. Leave this one sit there.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, Mr. Shea.
move to approve the language in Chapter 3, Section 2 as described in the packet.
Lambert, second.
Motion by Commissioner Shipe, second by Commissioner Lambert. Is there any further discussion or comments? Seeing none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed?
Aye.
We have one opposition. Thank you. Taking the next one, Jennifer?
I am, thank you, Mr. Chair. So the next one is Chapter 3, and Tony, you can keep it right there, it's just at the bottom of that. Thank you. Next one is Chapter 3, Finances, and this is numbers 3 through 5. At the April 20th Charter Commission meeting, the commission discussed the intent of the language within the city limits of the city of Brainerd. A motion was made to send that back to the council, that the Charter Commission's intent was that the money levied shall be spent on entities fully within the city limits of the city of Brainerd. Therefore, to clarify the intent, we are proposing to amend the language to be stated entirely within the city limits of Brainerd in Chapter 3, Sections 3, 4, and 5. So you can see that up on the screen there, and then that would be for community action program and events, for senior citizens or subsidized nonprofit senior citizen organizations, and arboretum or green space organizations. Mr. Chair, I can stop after this one, or I could go on to the next recommendation in these three. I'll leave that up to you.
I just have a question about the senior organizations. It doesn't say that language of, 1 second here. I'm sorry. I had it where it says Okay. It says one or more is not included in the language you proposed to us for the senior programs. However, it does indicate, it kind of worded that there's more than one, but I don't know if that's necessary to have that in there.
Mr. Chair, I did add an S to that, so it says for the benefit of senior citizens or to subsidize a nonprofit senior citizens organizations, but I can certainly put one or more. I think that's a better clarifier.
Yeah, I didn't know if anybody would care. I just noticed it says that you added one or more and it implied to all three, but it wasn't in that one. That's all I.
Thank you.
I guess I'm okay with the language. It kind of shows it's plural, so, I mean.
Yeah, thank you. I can make that change if the Charter Commission so chooses and put one or more in front of that. And that is the next item. And that's that additionally, the Charter Commission made a motion to allow the distribution of funds to go to one or more organizations. Therefore clarified it by adding one or more in front of the organizations minus that senior center one. And I'd be happy to include that in. So it could say for the benefit of senior citizens or to subsidize one or more nonprofit senior citizen organizations.
I guess it would be equal to the others. Then.
Yes, it would be. Thank you.
And I jumped ahead here on you. Sorry about that.
No worries.
Okay, so.
Those were the two items in section, chapter 3, sections 3 through 5.
Does anybody have any comments on this one or two?
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Mr. Yeager.
Thank you. I'll try to keep this brief. But it probably won't be, so I'm asking for forgiveness right now. And because I know that there's very high likelihood that people will be rewinding this video to hear what's about to come out of my mouth, I'm going to preface this by saying that what I'm about to say, the first point I want to make is that I fully support the center, community action, and the Arboretum, all of their endeavors, everything that they do. I have not one bad thing to say about any of those entities, and I have not heard one city member or anyone from the public say anything negative regarding these entities, all right? As many of you may know, I've received a fair amount of criticism for the position that I took, specifically regarding the language about city limits. And I would personally like to thank the people that have called, emailed me, challenged me publicly, criticized me publicly, because what it did is it proved as the impetus for me to reconsider the language that is in section 3, 4, and 5. So I will say that this has consumed all of my brain power, which is somewhat limited. We'd all agree to that, but it's consumed all of my brain power over the last couple weeks. And I want to say that my position on this language and what is in the charter has changed. I will be making a motion, if not during this discussion, perhaps later, because I want to be respectful of you, Mr. Chair, and I know you have added an agenda item which is in potentially as a part of this conversation, but I will be making a motion to strike this language completely from the charter. Okay, and I want to be very clear on why I believe that that is the right thing to do. It is not the merit of these institutions. It has nothing to do with that. What I am hung up on and what has thrown me off of the rails is the concept that while good intentions years ago set forth in motion, money being taken from taxpayers and given to these wonderful institutions, while it was a fantastic idea and was well-intentioned, in my opinion, it has one dramatic negative drawback, and that is, I believe this proves favoritism. And here's where I'm going with this. The city of Brainerd has thousands, if not tens of thousands, of amazing nonprofits operating within our city limits. Anyone on this board can name 50. These are institutions that are fighting every day tooth and nail to keep their doors open, to keep staff, to keep programs going, to keep soup on the shelves, to keep books on the shelves for children, to keep these programs alive, these institutions receive zero, nothing. Not one penny, not one dime, not in-kind services, nothing. So the question that I have been asking myself isn't why the ARB or why the center or why community action, but why just those? And why is the city of Brainerd in the position or putting themselves in the position to take money out of taxpayers' pockets, filter it through our checking account, and selectively pick 3 institutions to give this money to? That's what I'm hung up on. It is my belief that to clean all of this up, the who, the why, how much, what do we do with the money if there's more left over, why, the RFP, all of this, it is my belief that the right thing to do is to eliminate this completely and get the city of Brainerd out of the business of funding nonprofits by taxpayers, okay? So, Mr. Chair, I will be making, if not now, later, a motion to that effect. I do not believe that it's the right thing to just strip this money instantaneously, and I will be attaching a couple recommendations to the City Council on how we can give these wonderful institutions a flight path off of this money. But I have seen and witnessed over the last couple weeks specifically how good intentions leads to charity, which leads to expectation, which leads to entitlement. And I have a problem with that. I really do. If these institutions are as valuable as we think they are and the citizens of Brainerd think that they are, they will have no problem moving forward into the future, not only sustaining, but also thriving. And so for that reason, my position has changed on this dramatically, and out of respect for your future conversation here, Mr. President, I'm going to turn it back over to other comments here. And again, just wanted to state my position before this conversation goes too far.
Thank you. Anybody have any further comments or questions as far as the proposed change here?
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Mr. Scheit?
I've also been noodling on this for the past several weeks, perhaps not as intensely as Commissioner Yeager, but I have also had something of a change of mind in really thinking about it's more of an adjustment to the language than a total striking, but thinking about the conversations we had was really focused on sort of respecting the value of the taxpayers' money and making sure it's going to benefit them. And I think there's maybe a way to ensure that or encourage that without specifically limiting it to a physical location. And I think we were really going for a competitive process to distribute the money. And I think that didn't really come to fruition. I think there were 2 senior organizations. There was 1 community action and 1 Arboretum or green space. But to really try to think about, can we sort of reframe this language around benefiting the residents of Brainerd, the taxpayers of Brainerd, and that in a proposal, you need to prove that the money you're going to receive will provide some benefit. And if that's the Arboretum, if that's the IMTBA wants money for planting trees at Cuyuna, if they can prove that Brainerd taxpayers will benefit, I think that's just as worthy of consideration. We are sort of the hub of a whole region here, and I think this money could be used to benefit the entities that Brainerd residents use all the time throughout the region. So I would be interested in maybe reconsidering the physical location restrictions and focusing more on providing benefit to Brainerd taxpayers and making sure we're using their money as the charter is described.
Thank you. Is anybody else? Jan?
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
I guess I have a really big problem that.
Jan, could you turn your mic on, please?
Thank you. There, can you hear me now? I really have a problem of Brainerd tax money going outside the city limits. I really, really do. And Mr. Yeager does make a good point that we are discriminating against other nonprofits. And I know the center has great importance to the community, but I think, is the community also be able to help with their budget and stuff too? You know, it's, so I really, I do oppose having any money going outside of the city of Brainerd's limits. So we'll see what the rest goes.
Mr. Chair,
Mr. Bevis.
Kelly,
Yes, it is, Kelly.
very intrigued by Mr. Yeager's soon-to-be proposal. Just regarding the weaning procedure, we have 5-year contracts with the, with 2 of the organizations and a 2-year deal with the other one. I think the weaning process is done. The only thing that's left now would be to notify them of our decision should we decide to go this way.
That would be pretty much the basis of one of my recommendations of that. So.
Okay.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Mr. O'Day.
Yeah, I'm surprised. I didn't think that this proposal would happen today. I do think that, I think differently about number 3 because it was not a referendum. The other 2 were. I know that that doesn't stop us from being able to take it off of this. I think, like you said in the beginning, well-intentioned. They're definitely all great nonprofits. There's nothing wrong with them. But when a city starts off and starts to fund a nonprofit, maybe in its infancy, when it's just developing, I think there should always be an end date. Because then what you have, otherwise what you have is an organization just operating outside of its budget, technically, because it's getting taxpayer dollars. It's not fundraising enough for itself. And I think that's what we need to, maybe in the weaning process, let these guys know that your budget will change eventually, but it doesn't have to. You just have to figure out some fundraising.
Yes, Ms.
I'd like to
Byrne.
ask Connie,
Jan, could you turn your microphone on, please?
is this close enough?
There's a push button.
Push.
There you go.
Bingo.
What was the amount for each one of those? Well, it's all the same, I know. That was for the last couple of years?
It's been around $100,000,
That's what
roughly.
yeah.
That was what the $500,000 equated to.
Okay. That's quite a bit of money when you multiply that times 3. I agree with Mr. Yeager's opinion on this. You know, other nonprofits have to figure out ways to make money makers, and I think the Arboretum has a building that they can do a lot more entertaining in to make money, to support themselves. End of story.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, may I make a second comment as I was listening? There's a lot of people in St. Paul who feel that they should cut off funding to the city of Brainerd. How much do we get in LGA? 4 million? So we're recipients of the same type of benevolence from the state of Minnesota. You know, it is a little more complicated, but maybe not. So far, we've been threatened many times to have LGA cut off. We have had it reduced, so.
Chair?
Yes, Mr. O'Day.
Is it not some of the legislature's point of view that things like this are the reason that we would possibly be cut off from LGA?
Excellent point.
Decrease, perhaps, maybe cut off is a little strong, but yeah, that's been a discussion going back a few years ago that based on our levying our taxpayers to fund a number of 501c3 organizations, that they look at that and say, well, if you're going to tax your citizens for that, why should you then receive the LGA amount that you do? So that is a concern. Anybody else? I would interested to hear the weaning process that Mr. Yeager's got in mind. I would, how about if we do this? Anybody have anything further? Because I would like to move into discussion on B and just sit that on the table before we proceed with any specific motion regarding the language before us that we've asked to have brought back to us regarding the change about more than one organization, and what was the first item that covered, I forget, Jennifer?
Within the city limits of Brainerd, to put the word entirely and then one or more organizations.
Right, so, let's just talk about B at this point, and then it has to do with, putting this on the ballot, and if we were gonna do that, it would have to be done according to what our RFP process has gone through with the two, and then, of course, this would be effective, after 2023 with the Arboretum that the council voted on to extend that to. So, I don't know how everybody feels about having this put before the voters specific to the Arboretum, and, that, I know you recognize that, of course, so I appreciate you holding off on that. It just seems to me, being that it was a council decision, that if the voters are going to approve this, I'm always hesitant to do that when it comes to spending taxpayers' money, because there are so many people who don't pay taxes in this city. There's a lot of rentals. They don't pay property tax, so are people just gonna vote for something like this because it doesn't affect them? That's my concern regarding having the citizenry vote on this. So if anybody's had any further comments or wants to ask questions about the referendum process, I guess that's why I brought it up, based on Mr. Yeager's comments and what other people might like to do with this particular language entirely within the city limits of Brainerd, and one or more organizations is what's before us. So, but I'll entertain whatever anybody wants to do at this point.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Mr. Bell.
Kelly Bevins.
Yes, it is.
So regarding the referendums on the first two, the senior center and community action, I mean, arguably, you can't stop it. I can go file a petition for a referendum that says you're a monkey. I mean, theoretically. So these, I don't know that initially if they were council-generated referendums or citizen-based. Jennifer gave us all the historical paperwork, I just don't recall. But I might say, and that would be the one thing against I like Mr. Yeager's idea. But if they were citizen-generated referendums, who are the seven council members to say, no, you can't do that, or no, you're stupid, or no, it's too much work, or no, for any number of reasons. And that might be the greatest argument to solving the Arboretum problem. It's a separate outside the levy. It goes specifically for them. If the people want to do it, and I hate to start separating with rentals and not rentals. You know what I'm saying? That would be like, well, the people who live in rentals only will count half towards their vote or something. It isn't, you can't do that. So my thought would be, at least as far as those two, they've asked for them. They're willing to pay the extra taxes. Maybe Mr. O'Day had an idea, maybe we never thought that without an end date that it could be a big, maybe if nothing else, all three could go back, but with 5-year referendums to match the contracts. Although I wish I would have known that they were 5-year contracts. I wasn't paying attention. I missed that. And they shouldn't be that long. But anyway, that's my point. That's my point on a little bit more comment on Mr. Yeager's suggestion, which I still like, and whether we should continue to fund these and whether the citizens should be the ones to finally decide. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, this is Jan.
Yeah.
May I ask Jennifer a little bit about that history? That was it a citizen? Was it what kind of? How did this all come about, or was it just through the charter? Do you remember?
It may take me a second to find it, and so don't quote me
Mayor
on
Bedard did it.
dates. There was a referendum for Brainerd Community Action and also for senior center organizations or senior centers, nonprofit organizations or programs. There was never a referendum for the Arboretum Does that answer your question?
It does.
But
On
who
the city
initiated
side,
that?
on the city side.
Who initiated that referendum request? Is that, do you know? Probably is, it's a referendum, so that,
Petition somewhere.
I think, I'm pretty sure that the community action one was council generated.
okay.
Something in the back of my mind thinks that, but don't quote me on that, please, because I'm not 100% sure.
I remember Mayor Wallin had indicated he was pivotal in getting that as a ballot referendum question for the community action. So whether I'm remembering that correctly, but the bottom line is the two were voter-approved referendums. So and that's the part about a voter referendum that I'm always hesitant about, is people come and go. Populations, the population demographics change, and all that stuff does over the course of many years. And, this has been some of these 20, 30 plus years ago. Maybe people would feel differently now, but then in essence, you're gonna pull the rug out from under organizations that have been counting on this money, which leads right into Mr. Yeager's thought of that sense of entitlement. So I definitely see your point of view on that, Mr. Yeager. So I don't know if anybody wants to further comment on I just put it on here at the request of somebody I hold near and dear to my heart, that we add that item. And so,
Mr. Chair?
yes.
I will comment on
Yes.
the idea of a referendum. I think, I'm just kind of trying to process this whole idea of if we're going to slowly get away from any of this type of funding. And Kelly, Mr. Bevins mentioned we should have made these referendums, 4 years or 5 years apart. So the citizens at the time can continuously vote on what they decided to fund. I would support that if this commission and the council wanted to go that way for the two organizations that have already been voted on. The other organization has already been given direction from council to go into a different type of committee between the county, the city of Brainerd, the city of Baxter, and the Arboretum. I don't know how far along that process has gotten. It's only been a week and a half. But I think if that committee wanted to ask, say, the Charter Commission for something like that, I think at that point, maybe we would talk about or think about putting a referendum out there for that specific organization. But I think, I agree with Mr. Yeager's suggestions, but I think it has to be done correctly. It's just, I'd love to hear the ideas on how to do that right.
Well, has everybody got their chance to speak on this, that wants to speak on this?
Mr. Chair, just real quickly, a quick question. Hypothetically, if this was struck, there would be nothing preventing, as Mr. Bevin stated, from any one of these institutions or any others coming forward to ask for a referendum for future funding after this ran out, correct?
Nothing stops them from asking. That doesn't mean it's going to happen, though, does it? I don't think it automatically, you can't presume it's going to get on a ballot. That does, I believe, take a council action, if I'm not mistaken. I know we can't do it.
Understood, but where I'm going with this is the mechanism is there for these institutions to go forward before city council and ask for future funding, potentially after the 5-year period is up.
If you're asking me, I would say sure, they can ask.
Mr. Chair, this is Jan. I guess what I would rather see them to come up and ask for a referendum to help fund it, but also with the understanding that it has to be within the city of Brainerd, the city limits of Brainerd. For the ARB, I know we got some of the property in our area. I don't know if we pay for some of the upkeep on that, if we would want to do that. But I think right now it's too early to decide if we want to do a referendum or anything. I think we should let the 2-year and the 5-year to kind of go and let us get our heads together and make it clean.
Understood.
No, did you want to try your, maybe continue on with what you were thinking before you make a motion, or however you want to do it?
No, well, I think basically what my thinking is that if we struck this language completely, we still have a contract that's already been executed with Community Action and the center that is good for 5 years. My recommendation to council would be to extend the 2-year to the matching 5-year of the other 2 institutions. This would give each one of these 3 5 years of which to know that this is coming and potentially think about alternate pathways to receive either funding from taxpayers or otherwise. But it would clean up all of the work in between now and the 5 years from city council and having to navigate who gets the money, why get the money, how much they get, is it in city limits, is it partially in city limits, and so forth. These 3 entities would get their money for 5 years. That would be my recommendation. And at the end of 5 years, because this language is struck, a new system would be put in place that, in my opinion, should be filtered through the city council and should be looked at in a case-by-case basis, not just for the center and the ARB and Community Action, but anybody else who has an amazing nonprofit that wants to come forward and make an argument for why they should get taxpayer money. That's the angle that I want to take.
Yeah. Mr. Chair,
Yes?
Mr. Yeager, would you consider a reduction on those 5 years of the monies? That there like to be a 5% reduction each year so that, you know, that they kind of you kind of learn?
Mr. Chair, if I may, absolutely, that's crossed my mind, and I will first say that I don't have every single potential aspect of this thought through, but I've dedicated a lot of thought to this. But my thinking is we already have contracts in place. It's going to be very, very difficult to go back to either one of the previous 2 that we have executed contracts with and say, we've decided we're going to wean you down over the next 5 years. It would be my preference to let them fulfill that contract to the full 5 years, have the Arboretum, again, because I just don't believe we should strip these funds even within a span of 20 months. It just feels, it's just too big of an entity. There's too many moving parts. But I do believe that 5 years is a fair amount of time for not only us to wean ourselves off of the mindset of funding these private institutions, but for them to also think about their own dynamics and maybe consider, is public funding the right way through the mechanism of taxes and referendums and city councils the right way to pay for programs, or is it other avenues? One of the great things I think about this is, in my opinion, is that the taxpayers will no longer be taxed this money. I honestly wonder how many people out there in the city of Brainerd know that their taxes every year, 300 grand of their taxes every year are going to these institutions. I wonder how many people actually know that.
Not many.
By not taking the money, you now give the power back to the people. Sorry, Mr. O'Donnell.
7 people?
Yes, sorry. 7. By not taking the money, you now give the power back to the people or the citizens to donate to whomever they want at whatever value they want, right? So then these people, these institutions, as well as others, can make their case and they can fundraise just like all the rest of the great nonprofits within the city of Brainerd. It's the favoritism that I'm struggling with here. It is the cherry picking a few of these that are special and don't have to follow the same rules as all the others. That's my hang up with this. And that's why I will be making the motion I will.
Well, the one thing I really enjoy about a committee such as this, in essence, we are advisory, and we make recommendations to the city council. So anything that you propose that passes here, it's in their laps. And that's the other thing about anything you propose that, say, the council approves. A new council could be starting in January, and that could all change. You know, we could have new members on this commission, and things can change. So we strike this language, it could come back next year if a new charter commission or majority or whatever wanted to change it. So, I mean, I'm not suggesting you don't make your motion. I think everybody should realize that. There's nothing permanent, even if it's in the charter. So no council action can be, I don't think there's ever a time where one council can't supersede the action of a previous council. And of course, Mr. Bevins, you would have as much knowledge of that as anyone, so. I'm prepared to listen to what your motion is. I guess it's up to us to decide if we want to go with it.
Okay. I'm going to try and wordsmith this here together, but I'm going to make a motion to strike the language completely, Chapter 3, Sections 3, 4, and 5 regarding the levy and the disbursement to nonprofits. And I'm going to make that motion with two recommendations to be passed along to City Council. The first recommendation is that this be filtered through the legal, the legal portion of the City of Brainerd to basically ensure that we're not potentially exposing the City of Brainerd to anything that might be beyond our scope of vision, and also just to verify that this would be a legal maneuver. Okay, so that's the first recommendation. The second recommendation would be to extend the Arboretum contract from its currently, from what was approved in the last City Council meeting to the matching 5 years of the other two nonprofit organizations, so they all have a similar time frame, and that is my motion, Mr. Chair.
We have a motion by Mr. Yeager.
Second, Lambert.
Second by Lambert. Any discussion?
I have a,
Go ahead.
I'm hesitant to even vote on this in this committee because I will have to vote on it at council. I don't know if this one will pass simply because of the last part that you added. There's already been a motion from council to fund it specifically until the end of 2023. And to make that advisory board for that specific organization. I don't know how a motion like this would affect a
And
previous
that's,
motion.
if I may, Mr. O'Day, and that's really why I use the framework of recommendation, not a condition of. So I'm hoping that gives the City Council the ability to say, the motion is to strike this completely. The recommendation is to give the Arboretum a little longer landing strip or takeoff, a little greater duration of time to field this change. So
it's almost a recommendation to that committee that's taking over, or the representatives of Brainerd into that.
That's where I have a little bit of a problem. If there's going to be a working group to bring people to the table, which I thought was fantastic that we have that opportunity now. I think it was kind of a wake-up call. And if there's that much enthusiasm for other entities, people that live outside the city limits of Brainerd that find funding from our county, our neighboring Baxter, I think that's a great opportunity. Will it work? Well, if it doesn't, we're right back at square one with the Arboretum still wanting the funding from the city. My hesitancy is what happens to that group based on your motion? Does it still stay in play? Because you've taken away, I think that was a caveat to the extension until the end of 23, that we also have a working group. If you take the funding until the end of 23 off the table and expand that, I guess I would like to see that working group still working to get other entities involved.
Mr. Chair, this is Jan Lambert. I don't see how that would affect that working committee. I think, in fact, it would probably help them, give them a clearer picture of what the views are. So I don't think it's going to affect that working committee.
Mr. Chair, yeah, and if I may add just one simple comment to that. This working committee has been put into place and will exist because of the merit and the value of what the city believes, the county believes, and the Arboretum believes. It won't exist simply because the charter says all of this has to happen. That's my belief. If you strike this from the charter, that doesn't say that the city no longer has any value in the Arboretum, or that the Arboretum doesn't have any value with the county, or so forth. So to me, that mechanism can work forward with partnerships. But to me, those partnerships would then exist outside of the bounds of a mandate of a charter.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Ms.
So you do have a motion on the floor?
Yep.
May I just
You
ask for
certainly may.
a clarification on the motion?
Certainly me.
So as I understand it, Mr. Yeager, your motion is to strike the language completely, sections 3, 4, and 5. That is your motion. Along with your motion are two recommendations, and that's to filter it through the legal process and then to extend the contract to match the ARB with the other two. So one is a motion and two are recommendations. Is that
Yes.
correct?
If I'm allowed to do that, and I'm,
Well, they're part of the motion, I would think, is
we're advisory, so I would think that,
I mean, I guess perhaps we should have voted on the motion and then listened to your discussion and include that as, so it's, I would look at what he said as part of the motion, to have those three portions, or those language struck, check legal, and then have this, what was the third one again, or the recommendation?
that would be to extend to consider extending the contract for the Arboretum to the matching contracts that have already been granted for
Right.
community action and the center.
So does that clarify it for you?
I am clear, thank you.
Okay. Does anybody have anything else?
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
My hesitation with this is, I think, I always go back to this, right? The charter is about our values, and I think what I like about sections 3, 4, and 5 are that they are a commitment from the city to provide funding to organizations that maybe can't fundraise on their own. I don't think planting trees is a real sexy charity, right? It's not always going to get the funding. A senior center, they might not have the capacity or the resources to go out and raise money the same way that the local branch of the United Way does. And so I'm hesitant to strike this, knowing that this is defining, as a city, Brainerd values seniors and green space and community action programs. So I guess I have reservations about removing that entirely, because I do value that in the same way that the street improvement fund was a way to say, we have a value of maintaining the streets that we have. We all hate potholes, and we want to make sure there's money to fix them. And that, I think, is a parallel to this.
Okay. Anybody have anything further? I'm going to ask for a roll call vote on this.
All right, I'm ready, Mr. Chair, when you are.
Seeing no more discussion, all those in favor, please follow the roll call.
Burton,
Yes.
Chesak,
Yes.
Lambert,
Yes.
O'Day,
Yes.
Shipe,
No.
and Yeager.
Yes.
And then Mr. Bevins is a non-voting
Non-voting
member.
We have a motion that's been approved, what is it, 5-1?
Correct, 5
Okay.
to 1.
Okay, thank you. Our next item is, did you have anything further? Oh, we didn't.
Mr. Chair, we have one more item in our memo.
Okay, thank you. I forgot about the memo.
No worries. It was a great discussion, thank you.
Okay.
So the bullet number 6 was talking about Chapter 5, the streets. And based on the commission's meeting on April 20th, it basically eliminated that whole entire charter. We were just talking about the assessments, and really we addressed that in the 4th bullet point. So I think it's just a clarification that, yes, indeed, we are striking Chapter 5 in its entirety and renumbering the subsequent chapters.
So do you need action on this? I mean, just you're looking for action to change,
I do, because we are, one of the recommendations in this is to strike that streets chapter. That is what City Engineer, Public Works Director Sandy discussed at the last Charter Commission meeting, but we went back to make some adjustments to that language that we discussed earlier tonight, if that makes sense. So at the last Charter Commission meeting, I thought there was consensus in Paul's recommendations to that streets chapter, but there was a piece that we had missed.
And I don't think at the April 20th meeting that you actually made a motion to confer with those recommendations.
So, Mr. Chair, I'm
Yes.
sorry. I'll make a motion to accept the recommendation of deleting Chapter 5.
Second, Shipe?
motion by Lambert, second by Shipe. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries. Thank you. Next item is adjournment.
So move, Lambert. Or did you have something to say?
Just,
Well, I guess we have comments and questions.
Okay.
Anybody have anything they wanted to add here? It's
Mr. Chair?
I'd like to ask Connie a question.
yes.
Do you happen to know what the first amount that each one of these three organizations got the first?
I could do some research, but I don't know off the top of my head.
From what I remember, and it might not be so, but it was between 25 and 30,000.
Okay. The half a mil.
Big difference.
I would have to do some research.
Generation
yes.
back.
Yep. I could do research and bring it back to the commission if you so
That'd be
like
nice.
to.
Anybody have anything?
Mr. Chair.
Yes, Mr.
A
Schick.
quick question for Administrator Bergman. Do you need motions to rename the other chapters? Or is that included in removing streets? No, just all the numbers.
No, I think we're good. I think the rest of it was administrative, and I think we're good. Thank you.
Anybody have anything?
No, and then, Mr. Chair, what I might add too is we will be preparing an ordinance to go before the council. That'll be on their June 6th meeting. However, I would like to ask the commission this question. We believe that the majority of changes that we've discussed tonight, there was agreement. So we were thinking we would have two ordinances, one on 3, 4, and 5, just that discussion about striking that in its entirety. And then the other ordinance would be everything else we discussed tonight. Is there any objections to that, or would you prefer to see these all in one ordinance?
Anybody have any objections?
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
I'd like to ask Mr. Kelly Bevins to weigh in on this, on how he'd like to see them broken up, as
I think as Jennifer presented, seems
Very well, thank you, Mr. Bevins.
I guess there's no objections, Jennifer.
Do you need a motion?
And
Okay.
I think I have direction. I think that's fine. Thank you.
seeing as we're on comments, I did want to comment that there have been some opinions in our paper talking about individuals on this commission as having a conflict of interest because they serve on the Parks Board. And I don't know these two individuals more than what I see of them here at a meeting, and all I do know is that it seems to me like our two commissioners in question of having a conflict, I don't know how they would stand to gain anything personally by seeing money that would otherwise go to a 501c3 to the Park Board, which I think the comment was made in jest, that it would go to the Parks Department. I don't know if that could be done, but it's disappointing that these aspersions that have been cast have seemed to blemish people's reputations in a way that I think was completely unfair and inappropriate. And also the item, whoever wrote it didn't do their research properly to find that this Arboretum referendum was not voter approved. It wasn't even a referendum, it was council action. And it's just disappointing that, you know, I think the best thing that happened is there's like a wake-up call. This light has been turned on and light has been shed on this issue. And whether you agree or disagree with people, I'd like to, you know, get their facts straight and not. The airport is owned by the city. The BPU is owned by the city. So therefore, we fund those two things. It's not like it's outside the city and we are taxing or levying taxpayers to pay for those. So it's outside the city, but we don't own the Arboretum. So that's all I have to say. Anybody have anything else?
Just to add to that, Mr. Chair,
Go ahead.
I was informed that the Parks Board is not a singular organization that could even propose anything come from this charter money anyway. That would have to be from one of the service organizations or any other 501c3 or nonprofit that would want to make a proposal. So,
Well, and again, I think every one of us that serve on this commission have done it voluntarily. We receive no compensation, and we all put in our time. And for whatever reason, if somebody doesn't like what we do, then by all means, come up and spend the time and do whatever you want to do. But get appointed. We have opportunities, abundant opportunities to serve the city of Brainerd on voluntary committees. So, by all means, step forward. So, you know. Anyway, we have an item to adjourn. If anybody wants to cover that. Motion by Lambert,
I'll make the motion again. Thanks.
Second, Shipe.
second by Shipe. All those in favor, please say aye.
I.
Motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you.